Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. My name is Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I am joined by my co-host.
I'm Jason Harris, filmmaker, comedian. Yeesh, not really many to go with here, are there? Anything I say makes me look like a jerk if I go with the comedy here.
We can bring some lightness to this topic. It's okay.
Pigeon catcher, world-renowned pianist.
Totally.
Josh, I know you were hoping I would make light of someone going and having a stroke and having diminished faculties, but I'm not going that route, Josh.
You can if you want to. It's okay. The movie takes it seriously enough that we can be jovial if we like.
Oh, does it? Do you think this movie's a bit heavy with its tone?
It is. It is.
Yeah.
So in this season of Awesome Movie Year, we're talking about the films of 2012. And the movie we are talking about in this episode is the Cannes Film Festival Palme d'Or winner. And it is Amour from Michael Haneke. Or I believe like his name is pronounced Hanukkah, but it feels weird to keep saying Hanukkah. But
I've always heard Haneke. Oh, that's interesting.
I think I was looking at Wikipedia as like the pronunciation guide, and I think that might actually be the way it is. But we'll just butcher it.
Oh.
He won't care.
And this is one of the 8 gifts he's given us.
Yeah, exactly. So this is a very serious film. It is about the sad decline of aging, starring Jean-Louis Trintignant and Emmanuelle Riva as a couple, an elderly couple in Paris. And the woman, Anne, she has a stroke, and then she has another stroke. And as Georges, her husband, says at one point, things will get bad and then things will get worse. And that's kind of how the outlook is for everyone in this film.
Josh, Haneke I'm going to just call him Haneke for the episode, if that's what we think his name is. He himself said that the theme is the question of how to deal with the suffering of a loved one.
Yes, it really is about what happens in this relationship when one person is in decline, is incapacitated, and needs to be cared for, and how does this change their relationship, and how does the other person deal with it? And is as bleak as it is, I will say, and I'm no expert on Michael Haneke, but I've seen a few of his other movies, and this is certainly the most compassionate and optimistic film of his that I've seen. So he generally has a very bleak and harsh and almost punishing worldview in his films, and that's directed as much toward the audience as it is toward the characters. And this movie has some gentleness to it that's not present in the other films of his that I've seen.
Yeah, what's going on? We did the Dardenne brothers. We're doing Haneke. These guys, they win the Palme d'Or. And what's going on there in that western front of Europe between France and Austria and the Belgium? Why are you guys so upset? What's happening? You got nice land there. You got a good life.
These are serious films. We talked about, I think 4 months, 3 weeks, 2 days, which is another Palme d'Or winner.
That makes sense, right?
That was pretty bleak. So, but Haneke as a filmmaker is known for this and for being extremely, like I said, nihilistic and almost sadistic in the way that he deals with the audience. And so this movie is a tough watch, but it has more hope to it, I think. At least the characters are nice to each other for the most part. They care about each other. And that's not necessarily present in his other films.
I don't know if there's hope in this movie. It's this impossible question to answer, right? Because Anne, after she has a stroke, she says she knows it's only going to get worse and she wants to die. And then, George, who loves her, says he'll just care for her. He's not going to let her die. And is that the right move? Is that a selfish move? These are impossible questions to answer, but there was definitely no hope. It wasn't like, oh, cool, just keep doing your exercises and you'll be back on your feet in no time. Although, look, if this didn't win the Palme d'Or, Josh, I could have been like, are you fucking with me right now, Josh? Because I went through this. I mean, my grandmother, the character of Anne was almost like a composite of what happened to my grandmother and my grandfather, where my grandmother lost her ability like to move her legs and everything. And then my grandfather was dealing with aspects of dementia at the end. So it was extremely tough for me to watch because it brought all of this visceral reaction back to seeing that.
Right. Well, I think that's part of the appeal. I don't know if that's the right word, but the reason that so many people connect with this movie and the acclaim for it is because it's not just you who's gone through this. It's not just the characters in this film. It's not just Michael Haneke himself, who was inspired in part by his aunt who raised him and kind of how things went with her toward the end of her life. This is a very common situation. I saw something similar with my own grandfather, and I think most people have some identification with this kind of situation. Even fairly young people, I think, if you look at grandparents or aunts or uncles or great grandparents or whatever, it's a universal theme. So when I say that it's hopeful, it's not that I mean that the situation for the characters is hopeful and that Anne is going to get better, as you say, obviously not. But I think it's more that it's got more hope about human relationships, that these people do care about each other and they try to do what's best for each other, even when that's sort of horrifying, and that what they do with love. And that is in contrast to other Haneke films where there is very little human compassion or love or anything like that amongst people in those films.
Yeah, so I'm new to the game of Haneke, Josh. Yeah. I don't have anything to compare it to. This is the first Michael Haneke movie I've seen. But it's a hard question to answer because she like I said, she tells George, like, I want to die. This is only going to get worse. So like, is he doing the most selfless thing possible, or is what he's doing very selfish? Like that's one of the effective questions this movie brings up.
Right. And regardless of where you kind of come down on that, I think it's clear that he does what he does because he believes it is best for her and for them. And he does it with the love that he's had for her for their entire marriage.
Yes.
So this movie was quite successful for something this depressing. It grossed $29.69 million on its budget of $8.9 million. So, I mean,
happy Hanukkah.
Yeah, exactly. And it won a whole bunch of awards, including, of course, the Palme d'Or. It was nominated for 5 Oscars, including Best Picture, Best Actress for Emmanuelle Riva, who was the oldest ever nominee for Best Actress at age 85, and I think is still the oldest ever nominee in that category. Best Original Screenplay and Best Director for Michael Haneke, and it did win the award for Best Foreign Language Film. It won the Golden Globe for Best Foreign Language Film. It won the BAFTA in that category, as well as Best Actress. It was nominated for 10 awards at the Césars, which is the French top film award, and it won 5 of those, including Best Film, and a whole slew of other awards.
Yeah, so Josh, let me jump on some of those things. Yeah. This Haneke also repeated the feat with the White Ribbon for Palme d'Or and Best Foreign Picture. Have you seen that one?
I have seen that one. And yes, that is a very bleak, unpleasant film to watch, but beautiful.
Okay. And then, that year, and we'll get obviously into the Oscars later, but Riva lost to Jennifer Lawrence, who I think was still in her 20s, right?
Was
for Silver Linings Playbook.
One of the youngest ever nominees in that category. So that's an interesting contrast.
Well, and actually, wasn't she up against the youngest nominee ever? The girl from Beasts of the Southern Wild.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Quvenzhané Wallis, who is, I believe you're right. That was a lead actress nomination and not a supporting nomination. So that makes sense.
As it should have been.
You're right.
And we'll talk about that. So Argo won Best Picture. Tarantino won Best Screenplay for Django Unchained. And Ang Lee won Best Director for Life of Pi, the movie that 2012 keeps bringing to us.
Yeah. But I mean, I think at this time, of course, there had not yet been a non-English language movie to win Best Picture. So, I mean, the odds were clearly stacked against it. Just the fact that it got nominated in that, I didn't realize in those major categories, I had forgotten that it had gotten nominated beyond just the foreign language film.
Yeah, and I think at the time maybe this was like the sixth or seventh foreign language film to ever be nominated for Best Picture. Josh, I pulled this out of the research at Cannes that year. Jury president Nanni Moretti told Michael Haneke that had it been up to him, he would have awarded the film not just the Palme d'Or, but Best Actor, Best Actress, Best Director, and Best Screenplay. Ironically, Haneke himself was responsible for getting the rules changed, which allowed one film to only win one major award, when in 2001, his film The Piano Teacher won 3 awards at Cannes, the Grand Jury Prize, Best Actress and Best Actor.
Yeah, I know they usually try to spread those around. I didn't realize it was as recent as 2001 that they changed those rules, because I think most film festivals usually try to, even if it's not a formal rule, just as a way of, giving support to different movies, they try to spread those awards around.
I mean, okay, but like, does Emmanuelle Riva not give like one of the great performances any of us have ever seen on film here? Like, maybe just for that alone, you'd be like, yeah, let's throw the awards out here.
Right. No,
the rules out.
She is fantastic in this movie, and in what I'm sure is an extremely difficult performance for her to give, and has to be difficult also, not just as an acting challenge, but I would have to think as a person at 85 years old to like go through all of these things that you imagine could theoretically be happening to you at any time, at any moment has got to be really emotionally difficult.
Yeah, and Josh, pronounce the lead actor's last name for me one more
Trintignant.
time. See, that's very good. I would have been like Trigonet.
But you can say that if you want.
But I mean, he's a legend, and he had taken years off from being in films to focus on stage work, and he came back specifically for this movie and specifically with Haneke. And these are just masters, showing their capabilities at this point in time.
Oh yeah, absolutely. He had been, I think this was his first film in 14 years at this point, and he is. I mean, both of them are these major actors of like the French New Wave era, and Trintignant especially had just done like 100+ films, I think, over the course of his very long career. So, I mean, I think that was part of it. And that's something that reviews mentioned too, that I noticed. I don't know if it's in any of the excerpts I have, but a lot of them talking about how some of the power here is the fact that you've seen these actors in their younger days in these major films, and now it's like them, and we're watching them as these characters who are declining, and that's an extra layer of sadness, because this movie is all about layers of sadness.
It is. Interestingly, I'm looking at the awards from Cannes from this year, and there is our friend from Romania won for Best Screenplay, Christian Mungiu.
Yes.
Yeah, who we talked about with that other lovely piece.
From 4 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days. Yes.
Which was a great
It was, and he's a Cannes favorite. I think a lot of his films have won awards over the years at Cannes.
But that's what I don't understand, because he won for Beyond the Hills, and then the Best Actress of the festival were both the actresses from Beyond the Hills. So I'm confused.
Yeah, I don't know how that works. But anyway, it wasn't like this movie was short on awards, certainly. And it also was almost universally critically acclaimed on an incredibly wide scale. So Roger Ebert said, Amour, which won the Palme d'Or at Cannes last year, is an unexpected kind of masterpiece by Haneke, whose films have included the enigmatic Cachet and the earlier Palme d'Or winner, The White Ribbon. We don't expect such unflinching seriousness, such profundity from Haneke. Unlike a mysterious film such as Cachet, which audiences are still debating, this one is spoiler-proof. Its opening scene essentially tells us how it will end. Why would we want to see such a film, however brilliantly it has been made? I think it's because a film like Amour has a lesson for us that only the cinema can teach. The cinema, with its heedless ability to leap across time and transcend lives and dramatize what it means to be a member of humankind's eternal audience.
I thought a lot about that opening scene after watching this movie, which is you see Riva's character and she's dead and she's on the bed and she's been there for a while at this point in time. And I thought about that, like, because we never come back to that policeman, we barely come back to that instance. I was wondering why start the movie with that scene. Was that just because this is so bleak and harsh that you kind of need to like let the audience know, okay, this is we're setting a baseline for where it's all going. Or it was interesting because like I was thinking like, would that have been more effective if we didn't see that until the end? I don't know, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think he kind of wants to tell you that it's not going to work out, even though you can intellectually know that someone of that age with those health issues is not going to recover most likely. But I think there's a tendency in films and just in life to have hope, to think that something could always turn out well. And he wants to make it clear to you that this is not a story about that. This is a story about a decline that ends in this death. And that you have that in mind the entire time as you watch what they go through is sort of my feeling about it.
Yeah. I mean, man, it brings back a lot of like just painful stuff. Cause you know, when my grandmother, I think it was like a similar situation. She had a surgery and maybe not everything went right. And she was paralyzed from the waist down. And my grandfather couldn't get it through his head that like she was never going to walk again. And, that's so tough to see, you know, people. I mean, these people clearly led a full life. They were, you know, we see them at the concert, and they were music teachers, and they had this nice place, so it's just tough. But I guess there's no such thing as a happy ending, Josh. We all die in the end.
We do, and certainly there are no happy endings in Michael Haneke films.
Michael Haneke,
even though he made a movie literally called Happy End. And I also, this is morbid, but I looked this up, and Roger Ebert also, he wrote that review 3 months before he himself died, and was obviously not, you know, in good health himself at that time. And I have to imagine those are things that might be on his mind as well, watching this film. Yeah, fun stuff. So Manohla Dargis in the New York Times said, "There is a great deal that is difficult to watch here, the indignities of debilitating illness included, and the equally harsh pain of witnessing a great love, a longtime companion, slowly fade away. Viewers acquainted with Mr. Haneke's work may find Amour too cold, cruel even, and its depiction of suffering a punishing, familiar gesture from a director who's long been interested in transforming spectators from simple consumers into critical thinkers. Yet there's another point to be made here, namely that all the violence in Amour is crucial to Mr. Haneke's rigorous, liberatingly unsentimental worldview, one that gazes on death with the same benevolent equanimity as life. This is a film that will make you weep not only because life ends, but also because it blooms."
Did you think there was a lot of violence in there?
I don't think she's meaning violence as in like literal like fighting between people, but just sort of harshness directed toward the characters and toward the audience, maybe. So no, there really aren't very many violent acts in this film, other than the final end of the life of Anne. Let's say I won't spoil it all, but you know.
I know, and again though, is that violent or is that compassionate at that point in time, right? You know,
right.
And there was a scene where George gets so frustrated that Anne won't intake food or water that and then she's almost like fighting him not to do it, that he slaps her. And it's a powerful scene because I mean, this is not a guy that we ever have had any inkling that he has ever slapped a woman, his wife, before, and he was just so frustrated that he can't save her and that she won't go along with any of the efforts that might help her, you know. But it's like one stubborn head against another, and again, like who's doing the right thing here?
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's what you could call maybe a violent moment, and then that final act, I think, is, I mean, it can be violent and compassionate. I mean, it certainly is an act of, I don't know, there's struggle there, but yeah, I think the character certainly sees it as compassionate, and it is compassionate toward her and compassionate toward him. That is not that he's not ever thinking of himself in there, and it's not like he should never be able to think of himself, right? He's a human being too.
And he has a lot of those conversations with his daughter, played by Isabelle Huppert, who we've talked about before on our Heaven's Gate episode. Josh.
Oh man, Heaven's Gate keeps coming up this season.
I know it's a it's a powerhouse film, and one day you'll get around to realizing.
Yeah.
That.
So finally, Kenneth Tran in the Los Angeles Times said, Amour is a perfect storm of a motion picture, with an icy, immaculate director unexpectedly taking on deeply emotional subject matter. What happens to a lifelong harmonious marriage when the wife suffers a series of debilitating strokes that change the couple's life beyond recognition? The resulting interplay of ruthless restraint and unavoidable passion, plus the film's refusal to shrink from depicting the inevitable horrors of physical deterioration, is devastating. Finally, however, as its title insists, Amour is a moving love story, a privileged glimpse of a relationship between two people who are everything to each other, and a film that enlarges our understanding of a reality we would prefer not to confront.
I think that's true, especially here in America, right? We don't do death very well here.
Yeah, I mean, this is a country where it never really comes up, and we get the sense, I think, from where they live, that these are fairly financially comfortable people. But
they're definitely, yeah. I mean, honestly, I don't mean to interrupt you, but that was one of the things I was thinking while watching this. Imagine if they didn't have money that like had the struggles they would have gone through here.
Right. But what I wonder is that in France, if they didn't have, I mean, they clearly do have money, but we never really talk about how much of this care is subsidized. I mean, there is the one scene where Georges pays the nurse that he's fired. And so obviously he has been paying these women or has to pay them. But, this is a country with nationalized healthcare, and there's never a question of, is this even going to be difficult to afford, right? Even if they're well off, he never says anything like it's costing a lot of money or asking the daughter about financial support or her offering financial support or anything like that. And she's clearly successful as well. So I think that's a big part of it, that even in the US, even if you're financially comfortable, something like this can just be so incredibly expensive that it completely decimates all of your finances.
Yeah, but who cares, Josh? Capitalism.
Yeah, they have capitalism in France too. They just
no, I know, but I'm saying but they don't use that as an excuse to be like, no, we shouldn't have universal health care.
True. Yes. Yeah. It's no good. So that's that.
I'm not an anti-capitalist.
Okay,
Josh, but I am pro universal health care.
I agree with you. I am horrified to imagine what sort of indignities will be visited upon me in my old age if I can't afford it.
Yeah. You've already experienced so many in your life.
Thank you, Jason. Yes. Anyway, so had you never watched this one or any Michael Haneke films before?
No, and you told me about how just brutal it was going to be, but it's a good movie, man. It's a really good movie, and I think it paces. It's got such a good pace to it. Like he does a great job of keeping a pace to this thing.
Yeah, that was one thing actually that I was a little less enamored of. Is I feel like it does get to a certain point where you're like, okay, now you're just being mean to the audience and the characters, and which is his thing generally. But I kind of did feel that way at certain points. But I do think it's really good, and I had seen it before. And I looked back at my review of it that I'd written, and I was sort of lukewarm on it at the time, actually. I think maybe in part because it had just been like this hugely hyped film. And already by the time I got to see it, it had been awarded and gotten so much acclaim that you have these high expectations. And at the time, I said something sort of similar to what Mandola Dargis says, is that it does exhibit some of this sadism that Haneke is known for, and the coldness or whatever. And I felt less that way this time. So I do think it's really good. And I've seen a few of his other films. And so maybe it's slightly colored by that, because like I said, those are just incredibly brutal in a way that is less of, here's what happens. You can watch this movie and think it's brutal, but it's real, right? This is something that really goes on. This is something that many, many, many people are going to have to face one way or another. Whereas in his other films, there's a lot more of like, this is a sort of elaborate situation that he's created to put these people and us, the viewer, through horrific torture. So, yeah. So, but I liked it a little more this time, I think. Dave, had you ever seen this film?
This is one of those movies I thought for sure I had, but once I was watching, I was like, yeah, no, I never saw this before. But yeah, it's great. I mean, it's just such a good movie. And Funny Games is the only other Hanukkah film I've seen.
The American one or the original?
The American one, not the
Yeah.
original.
Although, Josh, I should tell you I was on Facebook earlier and I learned from Sonny Rosen that Dave watched Jim Belushi in K-9 100 times as a kid.
Well, that's a different kind of torture, I think, right?
Just wait for that awesome movie.
Yeah, I can't wait for. I think I'd rather watch this again than K-9, but we'll see about that. Anything else on the background of this film you want to mention, Jason?
No, I just want to say, because like it's, we'll talk about it. It's a good movie. And, usually when you see like, and obviously Hanukkah's like a master director, right? And you're like, oh, I should watch more of his stuff. But the way you describe all of it, it's like, I don't want to watch more of his stuff.
Yeah, I don't blame you. It's difficult. And I was thinking, oh, maybe I'll try to watch another film, maybe like The Piano Teacher, which stars Isabelle Huppert, before this episode. And I didn't really have the time for it, but even if I had the time, I think I would have been like, okay, I got to brace myself because I have to watch Amour too. And I've already seen it once.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is a difficult experience to watch any of his films, but I think usually worthwhile. So we'll get into more of that when we talk about our general thoughts on Amour. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 2012, we are talking about the Cannes Palme d'Or winner, Amour from Michael Haneke, and the general unpleasantness, but rewarding unpleasantness, I think, usually, of this director's films. And Jason, what was the hardest part of this film for you to watch, do you think?
Oh, let's go there. Let's see. I mean, the whole disintegration of Riva's character, like I said, it reminded me of a combination of both of my grandparents. But I think at the end, where he's singing to her and you see her like struggling to get the words out of the song, and it's like this combination of her body has failed her and you don't know how much of her mind has failed her at this point. Like, that was a very difficult scene to watch.
Yeah, and I think, as we've said, Emmanuelle Riva's performance in this movie is so impressive, and that's such a physical performance. The way that she's fully physically
how
able.
Do you do that?
And yeah, to do that, is just as much of a physical effort, I feel like, as someone playing like a demon in a horror movie or something where they have to contort their body in weird ways. So
it might be harder, Josh, because you really have to just focus on specific elements of your body as opposed to using the whole instrument, right?
Right. And really seized up there. But yeah, I think for me, one of the most difficult things is that scene that we mentioned where he's trying to get her to drink water and she's just refusing. And, you think about why she's doing this seemingly because even though she can't communicate anymore, she's doing this seemingly because she wants to die. And he even says, if you don't drink, you're going to die. And I was thinking about how awful it would be, as terrible as her situation is at the moment, how much worse it would be to sit there and then like die of dehydration or something. That's what she feels like is a better alternative to what she's dealing with at that moment. So, that was rough.
I think at that point, I think it was almost more of a statement of like, let me go,
right?
So, and I dealt with that. I know you said you have too, but it's hard. It's so hard. So, yeah.
Yeah. I haven't, been as close to it just in real proximity, maybe. But yeah, my grandfather definitely had a bad decline in the last year or so of his life, I would say. So thankfully I didn't have to witness a lot of that directly, because I'm sure it was very, very difficult. But, again, I think this is a thing we're talking about this and our experiences, whatever they are very, very common. This is something that a lot of people go through, whether it's eventually with a spouse or it's with a parent or a grandparent or all of those. Is something that you might end up having to face multiple times in your life.
Right. Hey, Josh, let me ask you a few questions about this. So he fires the nurse who he said treated her badly. Did I miss something in there? I didn't really see any instance of the nurse treating Riva's and that badly.
I mean, the only scene that you see of that is when she's like combing her hair, and she's doing it a bit aggressively. I guess it looks like it's maybe not very pleasant for her. And clearly she doesn't want that to be done to her at that moment. And then the nurse like is trying to show her her reflection in the mirror, and she's very upset. And I don't know if that's meant to specifically be the incident that is like the breaking point, but I think the idea there is that she's just maybe insensitive and
she's going to just do it her way and not listen, have the bedside
That's
manner.
what I saw. That's exactly what I saw. It was just by the books, not taking into account her feelings whatsoever.
Yeah. And that maybe, not that she's being harmful necessarily, but he is unable to see someone treat his wife with that level of sort of indifference, where he's been doing everything possible to treat her with the most care, even, to his own detriment, possibly.
Definitely to his own detriment. I mean, dude, how could you come out of that situation stronger? You know what I mean? Like, it's got to just tear you apart physically and mentally and emotionally. And he knows that, let's talk about the ending.
Okay.
With the spoiler, as you've mentioned. Right. So eventually he does smother her after he tells her a nice story from his childhood. And it's kind of his way of letting her go. And then we know what's happened is he's put her in this nice dress and he's put flowers all around her. And then he just seals up the room with tape. And we see him go into the kitchen, and he has this vision of Anne, and she's getting ready to go out, and he's going to go out with her. And she says, aren't you going to bring a jacket? And then he grabs a jacket and leaves. And that's the last we ever know of this person. And we know from the beginning that the only reason that they found Anne was because of, people either checked or there had been no type of response from anything in the apartment for days.
Right. I mean, I got the impression that he is now also dead. And we see that after he seals up the room, that for some undetermined amount of time, he's just been living there. We see that he's set up a bed in like the den or office area or something like that. So he's just been living. And then right before that final scene of him, when he has this vision of her being perfectly healthy and getting ready to go out, he kind of wakes up in the bed and he struggles to get up.
That was a hard scene to watch, too.
Yeah. And I think what that indicates there is that is a moment where I feel like, he has also died, right? Whether he had a heart attack or a stroke or something, his body has given out and he's dead. And even though we don't see in that opening scene when they break in, we don't see them find his body like we see her body, but we also don't see that room and what's in there. And my guess is that was my feeling, is that he's now dead. And whether it's the afterlife or just some sort of dying vision that he has, there's a moment for him to feel like they have reunited in a sort of happier circumstance. And that's what he's got at the end of his life.
Is there anything to this, Josh? Throughout the movie, these pigeons keep flying in the window, right? And we see at one point Anne is on the floor by the window because she was trying to probably jump out of the window, correct?
Oh, I didn't necessarily, maybe. I didn't necessarily get that. I thought it was because at that point, she's in better shape, I guess, and is mentally competent. And I thought that was a more of an illustration of her stubbornness, that she thought she could grab something off the table or whatever without help and has to realize that, no, she can't. But you might be right.
Okay,
you might be right.
And you might be right. But we kept coming to the window and unwanted, birds coming in and maybe her trying to get out. And I thought, maybe that's what happened. Maybe he just jumped.
That's what I thought.
Really?
Actually. Yeah, I thought that he took all those clues of the birds, of her possibly trying to jump, and that's what he did after he finished smothering her.
I mean, the only reason, or the main reason that I would say that's not the case, is that if that had happened, someone would have noticed. And when they break in at the beginning, you get the impression that no one has seen either of them for some period of time. That's why they're breaking in. And the neighbor says, oh, I don't know, they had a nurse coming for a while. Like, I don't think that his body is sitting on the ground below the apartment building and no one ever saw that it was there.
Yeah, and that goes back to, again, that first scene. Like, what if we had just seen that scene at the end and not at the beginning? But yeah, that's a fair point.
Mm-hmm.
Also, it could just be that, like he got to his breaking point mentally, right? And, now he is, having diminished faculties, and maybe he does believe that his wife is saying, hey, let's go out, and he's just an old man lost in the city at that point in time.
I mean, I guess that's true. Theoretically, he could be wandering around somewhere, but they break in, and I mean, I guess he could have wandered out, locked the door, left, and then they break in later. But that's not the impression that I get. I'm pretty sure that this is meant to indicate that in one way or another, they are now both
They're
dead.
both dead. Yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Well, that solves that mystery.
Good. This is definitely one of those. This is like a puzzle box movie that you need to solve. It's really more like a J.J. Abrams production, I think, what we got going here.
I mean, look, so one thing I read is the script is only like 60 pages, and each shot goes on for about 32 seconds average, right? So he's really letting the actors play out in these long takes, and like you're getting these amazing performances. And it never feels like, I mean, it all basically takes place in one location, and it never feels like that location's getting stale or old. Like, he has a good way of keeping it, moving and showcasing the area and the environment. And I mean, it's a good movie. It's a good character study. I think it could be a good play also.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it does, other than we see not at the very, very beginning, because we start with that break-in scene, but when we first see Georges and Anne, they are out of the house. They're attending this concert with their student, who has now become this renowned pianist. And once they come home from the concert, then we never leave the apartment. And that's sort of this final moment. And I think that's one of the heartbreaking things too, is that you can see that here they are going about their daily lives. They're doing all these activities. They're going to this concert, and not that it's not an important concert or something that they're really wanting to do, but it's just one more thing that can suddenly then become like the last thing that you do. And after that, everything changes for them. And they leave the house because we learn that she's hospitalized for a certain amount of time. And he goes out here and there to run errands or whatever. At one point they talk about him going to the funeral of someone who I assume is like one of their friends, but we never see any of that anymore. We just see what's going on inside the house. Yeah.
It's very, all those points, like I said, like they all happen in my life, like to my grandparents. So it's tough. Like, this is 2012. I remember, like, I told my grandparents how much I love Moonrise Kingdom, and they were going to go out and see it, and my grandma fell. And then that was that, like, on the way, so it's crazy how quickly things like that can change, and this is such a hard movie. We didn't even talk about like one of the most harrowing scenes at the beginning, where they're just at the breakfast table having a nice conversation, and she suffers a stroke, and you're just seeing like her body and her mind just shut off, and it's just so off-putting. Like off-putting is maybe not the right word, but again, hard to watch, and just like, oh my God, tough.
Right. Yeah. And I think if you know anything about this film, even if you haven't seen it before, you're just sort of waiting for this to start happening. It's almost like a suspense. You watch the early scene, and rather even if you don't know anything about the film, just based on the opening scene. And I think that's one of the things, is that Haneke wants to set that expectation for you that like things aren't going to go well here. And you're just waiting for, how is it going to start? And then it happens in that moment. So, it's rough. And I think going back to what you're saying about, Haneke as a director, and this movie is full of these long takes and keeping the camera in place a lot, and often showing some of these scenes without as many close-ups. I mean, there's a long scene where Georges talks to their daughter, the Isabelle Huppert character, and Haneke shoots most of the scene from behind Georges' head. So you don't even see his face as he's talking, and you see her as she's talking to him. But, there is, I think, that remove, which is something that he's known for, these films being very aloof, being very clinical, and also where you have to really hone in on something in the frame and he's not going to direct you to what it is. I think of also the scene where we see the audience in the concert at the beginning and you don't necessarily know who our main characters are yet. And they're just there amongst the audience and you have to kind of pick them out. And, he's known for that, the review that talked about the end of Cachet, and there's the scene at the end of Cachet that people talk about again and again is something where you have to really like pick out some tiny background thing that's key to the entire plot of the movie that wraps it up at the end, theoretically, that people debate. So, I mean, there's definitely that remove. And I saw this quote from Trintignant who said, often directors ask us to show what we feel. And with Haneke, no, above all, you mustn't show what you feel. You just have to feel, and he does the rest.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know, he said how much he respected him and, how much he trusted him. So I think we should rate this thing, Josh, before I want to jump out of a window.
Oh, man. I mean, I guess I just wondered, like, did you feel at any point that it was sort of too removed or that it was picking at the audience like somebody picking the wings off a fly?
It's relentless, but I don't think so. Maybe if he had killed that pigeon, if he had just like taken the anger out on the pigeon, but no, I don't think so. I mean, this was about the decline of a person and the health of a couple, right? So I think it all went as I could have gone.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I did. Like I said, in my review that I wrote at the time, I was critical of that. And I did feel that a bit here at a certain point. It's like, yes, it is depicting all that, and it wants to be very clear about every little bit of horribleness that happens. But I did feel like at a certain moment, okay, I've had enough. And not I've had enough like, oh, this is hard to watch, because I mean, it is, but also like you've made your point and now you are just fucking with people.
I guess, I mean, the counter of that is that happens, right? Where people do lose their capacities and then they're still alive and then it still keeps going, right?
Right.
So,
right. And it didn't bother me as much, but I maybe just knowing what I've known about him and his other films, it seemed like he maybe takes a little bit of pleasure in knowing that people are going to be very unhappy while watching this film.
So your theory is he created this whole movie about this woman who goes from healthy to double stroke victim and loses all of her capacities, and which is influenced by his aunt's situation. He did all of this just to torture an audience, Josh.
I mean, not entirely, but in a little bit, yes, because that is his thing. And that's what he's done in many, many other movies. And that he wants people to feel discomfort and he wants people to look at themselves. Like that one review mentions, like I think Manola Dargis, she mentions like the critical thinking, the idea of examining why are you watching a movie? What are you getting out of the experience of watching any movie, of watching characters do what they're doing in these films? Yeah. So I think there's a level of that, less so than in his other films, but I think it's there. So
I feel like your review is exactly what your review is for Jackass.
I would honestly rather watch this again than watch a Jackass movie. Add that to K9. Yeah.
Well, let's rate it, Josh. Out of
Jason's
5,
ready to end the pain.
A 5 incoming pigeons, shall we? Or 5 symphonies, whatever you want.
Those are both nicer things than we could have picked. So go for it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It gets 3.5 from me. It's good, and the performances are amazing. So it's hard to watch, but as we saw when we posted this on social media, a lot of people were, when we said, what movies do you want us to cover? This was one of the movies that kept coming up. And yeah, it's a good film. Watch this movie.
It is a good film. And I'm going to give it 3.5 pigeons as well, which is an upgrade from what I gave it when I first saw it, because I feel like my misgivings are less strong now. But it is a very good movie. It's not something that I'm necessarily pleased that I watched twice, but if you've never seen it once, it's certainly worth checking out. So Dave, how would you rate this?
I'm going with 4 pigeons. It's a great movie. And like you guys said, it's a difficult watch, but it's really, really good.
Yeah. I mean, kind of prepare yourself, but give it a shot, because there will be maybe a catharsis too to watching this potentially. So we'll come back in a moment and talk about the legacy of Amour. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 2012, we are talking about Cannes Film Festival Palme d'Or winner Amour from Michael Haneke. And as we said, this guy, he's a major international filmmaker. This is certainly his most well-known and I think sort of quote-unquote mainstream film in terms of, like we said, all the Oscar nominations and things like that, where I feel like previously his films were well known amongst people who were interested in art house movies and stuff like that, but less so in the wider culture. And this broke out there, but he himself was getting on in years there by the time he made this film, and he's only directed one other film since this one, which is called Happy End from 2017, which I haven't seen, but does also feature Jean-Louis Trintignant and Isabelle Huppert. And weirdly, I don't believe it's connected in any other way, and I haven't seen it, so I can't say for sure. But for some reason, Jean-Louis Trintignant, his character in Happy End has the same name, Georges Laurent, as his character in this film, and I'm not sure exactly why that is.
Well, maybe we have to watch that to see if he gets a happy end.
Yeah, maybe a happier end, but I don't think so. It's a Haneke film.
Yeah.
So yeah.
But he hasn't made a movie in 5 or 6 years, like you're saying.
Right, yeah, 2017. And I don't know that he has anything in the works right now. I mean, he himself is now 80, so he may be getting into retirement. He has directed some stage work. He directed an opera in 2013. So a little bit of that, but overall seems to have kind of wound down. I would be surprised if he's having difficulty getting a movie made because he is so well known, especially in Europe. I'm sure he can get something going if he wants, but I'm not really sure what his status is.
Yeah, and then Josh, this film was produced by Les Films du Losange. How do you like that?
Sure.
Which was founded by Barbet Schroeder and Eric Romer. So, you know, it would be like if Criterion put out your film for you or something.
Right. And Criterion certainly has put out some Michael Haneke films. And right, this is a French film, but Haneke himself is Austrian, and he's made films in German and in French and in English. So he's quite the international auteur there.
And Josh, including Funny Games, which he remade in English from its original language.
Right. And he
made that movie twice.
Yes. And that is his only film in English. And I've only seen the English language version, but from all I remember reading about it is that it's not just that he remade it, but it is a shot for shot, word for word remake that he did basically just because he wanted that movie to reach a wider audience. And I remember at the time that movie came out, the English language version, that was some of that was criticism of it, that it had essentially no difference from the earlier version. And I remember Slant Magazine, which is a movie review publication that I like reading, and they were so adamant apparently about this that their review of the English language version is verbatim their review of the German language version with one phrase added that it's now in English or something like that. Like, that's how similar those movies are, apparently.
What a shot they've taken.
Yes. Obviously, that was a criticism.
Josh Trintignant, if that is his name.
That is not.
Oh, Trintignant.
There you go. You got it. You got it.
He died last year at age 91. As you said, just a legend, or I said it. Z, Three Colors Red, and God Created Woman, The Man Who Lies, just a ton of classic cinema from the other side of the ocean.
Right. And almost all of that before this film, he, again, had been essentially retired for 14 years and came back. And then he did appear in Happy End. And the last movie he made is a Claude Lelouch film called The Best Years of a Life. And that is the third film in Lelouch's series that began with A Man and a Woman, which is one of his both Trintignant and Claude Lelouch's most famous films, and a big major French New Wave film, and was almost like his, before trilogy or something like that, checking back in with these characters over a much longer period of time, obviously. But that was the final film that Jean-Louis Trintignant appeared in, and before his death last year.
That's why we pay you the big bucks, Josh.
Oh, yeah, right, because I can read Wikipedia.
Yeah, no one reads Wikipedia like
Man,
you do.
I'm so good at it.
Riva died a few years earlier. She was also in one of Kieslowski's Three Colors films, which was Blue. And Josh, how would you describe the Three Colors for people who don't know it? Polish filmmaker made this trilogy in the 90s, and it's like this kind of landmark series. Would you not say?
Yeah, I haven't seen those movies in quite some time, so I don't know that I could describe like the plots of them, but I think they're mostly thematically connected. They're not narratively connected per se. I think,
and they're red, white, and blue.
Yeah, and representing different emotions or different sort of life experiences. I'm messing it up probably, but you're right. Definitely landmark films from Kieslowski, and each one about mainly about a female character. I think Juliette Binoche in one, and is it Julie Delpy in another one, and I forget in the third one. So maybe I'm totally wrong.
I think it's time for us to revisit it. I haven't seen them since college.
Yeah, I think one of them might have been an option potentially for one of our seasons, and we didn't end up doing it. But certainly those are major international films. Emmanuelle Riva also, she only had a couple, I think one or two more film roles after this, but she did return to performing on stage, and that was something she did a lot in her career. Isabelle Huppert, like you said, we've talked about her in Heaven's Gate. I mean, such a different kind of movie. She's an incredibly prolific actor in multiple languages, really like one of the major international actors of the last, 30 years more. Finally was nominated for an Oscar for Elle, the Paul Verhoeven film. And she worked with Michael Haneke again. She was also in Happy End, but had previously worked with him in The Piano Teacher, and I believe in The Time of the Wolf also, which I've seen. And I just love, this is the range of her career. Her two major roles in 2022 were in EO and Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris. I mean, I feel like you can't get more diverse than that. Yeah.
Who did she play in EO? I don't even
the
remember.
Donkey. I don't know. I haven't seen it, but I just noticed that it was her credit. So
I think it's funny though, Josh, because she is one of the most acclaimed and awarded actresses of the last 40 or 50 years. And this is a smaller supporting performance. And Heaven's Gate, we said, was probably the wrong fit for her. So I don't think we've really, gotten to the meat of what she's able to accomplish as an actress on this show.
Right. Yeah. I think we've not talked about a movie where she's the lead performer. And in this one, it is a smaller role. I would imagine in part because she'd worked with Michael Haneke before and was happy to do whatever he asked of her. But I mean, I think she's good. You have to convey, we didn't really talk about that character, but you have to convey there the mix of caring, and also she's a bit self-involved. There's that scene where she's just talking meaninglessly about her investments or whatever to Anne, as Anne is lying there in bed, unable to speak. And it's like, on the one hand, that seems very self-involved, but on the other hand, you can imagine that if you're in that situation and you're just at such a loss for like, what do I even do here? You just start babbling about whatever comes to mind.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. Is like, she's just like, well, what would I normally talk to you about? That type of thing.
Right. So, but I do think that's a good performance from her that's just overshadowed because the others are such major pieces of work.
You're a major piece of work.
The other person I wanted to mention briefly, Alexandra Thoreau, who is the pianist who they see perform at the beginning of the film and then comes to visit them later on. And he's an actual French concert pianist playing himself. This is the only movie he ever acted in, and went on to record many, many albums as an incredibly successful classical musician in France. And I thought that was kind of interesting and random.
Yeah, I noticed the same thing.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not sure how that came about and why he ended up being in the film that way, but what a film if you're going to be in one movie in your entire career. What film to pick?
There you go. This is the one.
Yeah. So, Jason, what is your favorite movie about the decline of old age? Do you have one beyond this one?
I have to think about that. That's a good question. So, let's see. We were my old writing partner and I were going to write one about a grandfather and a grandson who. The grandfather knows he's going to die, and he says, like, I want to go, have one more week in Vegas and party it up with you. And then I'm going to kill myself. So a decline in old age. That's, do you have one, Josh? I'll have to think about
Yeah,
that.
well, because I came up with this, so I thought of it. But yeah, I mean, I was thinking of The Father. I mean, especially in terms of like, if we talk about legacy of this film, things that have come later. That movie, which was just from a year or two ago, and is also incredibly hard to watch, with an amazing performance from Anthony Hopkins as a man who's dealing with dementia, and a movie that really puts you in the perspective of the person who's dealing with this. You know, if we want to say Haneke has a certain level of remove, perhaps here, The Father is the opposite of that. And it really puts you right alongside what would it be like to experience this. So I don't know if you've seen that, Jason, but it's a tough watch, but also a really good film.
Cool. That'll be a great double feature for Valentine's
Yeah,
Day.
totally. Yeah. If you've not seen these
I've got one to throw in.
Yeah, I know. Dave, I have a feeling Dave was going to mention. Go ahead.
Yeah, Gaspar Noé's Vortex, which, by the way, when we covered that on a trailer episode, Jason, I was so sure I'd seen Amour. I used it as a puzzle piece for it. But then I found out, I never actually saw that movie. But yeah, I mean, just as brutal. And it's about an old couple dealing with dementia. And of course, it being Gaspar Noé, you know, first of all, just as brutal as can be, but then it kind of has, I don't want to use the word gimmick, but I mean, I guess that's what you would call it, of it being split screen to kind of keep their experiences separate because they can't really understand each other anymore at that point. And so, yeah, it's another very difficult watch, but really great.
Yeah, and Noé, like Haneke, I feel like as a director who's known for that kind of brutalizing of the audience and the characters. And I feel like a lot of the discussion around that film was similar to this one, where here he's now making a movie that's more sensitive, that's more caring, and in contrast to his previous films, yet with the same kind of technical prowess that he brought to those other films. So
yeah, absolutely.
I haven't seen that, but you know, I won't.
It's a tough hang.
There you go.
Yeah. So anything else on the legacy of this film, Jason, you want to talk about?
I need a hug.
Yeah, I'm going to give you a virtual hug. And this was a rough one, but we made it through. That is Amour. That is this episode of Awesome Movie Year. Give us a hug online and on social media.
Hey, Josh, how about Up for that answer?
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah,
Hey,
that is a good one. That is devastating in like 10 minutes. Does a lot of
the perfect 10 minutes, right? Yeah. We are on social media. Perfect time to plug it after we've just talked about a group of people who are up there in age who probably don't know how to use social media or wouldn't use social media. We're at awesomemovieyear.com, Awesome Movie Year on Facebook and Instagram, Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter. I'm Jason Harris Comedy or Jay Harris Comedy on all the socials. I have a website, Eat This Comedy. I'm also Eat This Comedy in the Trivia Party on Instagram.
Not much at joshbellhateseverything.com. Maybe something about some Michael Haneke movies from back in the day. I don't remember. But more stuff, you can check out Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook, at Signal Bleed on Twitter, and at Signal Bleed on Letterboxd. And listen to our producer, David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
Check out Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow us on social media at Piecing Pod.
And Jason, what uplifting film are we talking about in our next episode?
I'm not going to say it's uplifting, but it's not harrowing like this one. And it's a really good documentary by Sarah Polley, who's nominated for Best Picture and Best Screenplay right now, I think, at the time of recording from this year's Oscars. We're not covering that movie, which is called Women Talking. We're covering an amazing documentary she made called Stories We Tell.
So tune in next time for Stories We Tell, and thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.